There's a fine line sometimes between what we find terrifying and what we find ungraspable, even wondrous. The best name for this experience, compelling and conflicted in equal measure, is the sublime. The sublime is as familiar as it is disturbing, but where did it come from? Did we invent it? If so, when? How does it differ from the beautiful? And where can we find it now in contemporary art?
My name is Sasha Golob. I'm the co-director of the Centre for Philosophy and Art at King's College London. And I'm here today at London's National Gallery to talk about one of the most interesting and also slippery concepts in Western art, the sublime. The sublime's been central to the way artists have handled the relationship between the modern world on the one hand and the natural world on the other. What we're going to do today is look at a little of its history, its development, and its contemporary force. Now, the place to start is in the 18th century, where you see theorists starting to join together three ideas to create the sublime. The first is the power of fear. So think of the last time that you were suddenly scared. Think of the viscerality, the intensity of that experience. The second is the lure of the ungraspable, the idea that art should engage with that which is beyond rational control, beyond rational understanding even. The third is our relationship to nature. Are we part of the natural world? Are we separate from it? Out of these three ideas is going to come the sublime. Now, the easiest way to approach it is to think of it as a competitor to beauty. So beauty, particularly in the 18th century, is associated with ideas of harmony, of order, of relaxation even. Particularly when you put it in a natural context. Think of the landscapes of Claude or Poussin. The sublime is going to offer an alternative to beauty, and with it, as we'll see, a new way of understanding ourselves and the natural world around us. The picture behind me, Vernet's Shipwreck on Stormy Seas, or The Tempest from 1773, is a good way to approach this. You have here a raging storm, destroyed ships, desperate survivors on land trying to pull their comrades from the waters. And you can see here immediately the features I flagged. First, there's the kind of shock and awe power of nature. Okay? Second, it goes far beyond what we can rationally control and contain. The best contemporary technology, these ships, are dwarfed by the storm, rendered useless by it. Yet, at the same time, the 18th century sublime likes to scare in carefully managed quantities. So our position as spectators is perfectly secure. We're set well back from the waves. Indeed, the great German Enlightenment thinker, Immanuel Kant, would go even further. He claimed that even the half-drowned survivors on land are ultimately secure in what really matters, their humanity. Because despite the threat that nature poses, they still act on their moral imperative to rescue their comrades. So you can see here how the sublime is used to position us as both subject to nature, as threatened by it, and yet as able to rise above it through our moral obligations. As the sublime develops through the 18th and 19th centuries, it radicalized this basic model in two ways. The first is physical. The canvases get bigger and bigger, seeking to induce a feeling of, at times, almost physical intimidation, of an ungraspable power that's literally too large to take in. By 1814, for example, and this work by James Ward, the canvas is nearly 4 meters square. For the Victorians, such vast images, often suddenly revealed from behind curtains, were the blockbusters of the day. The second way is spiritual. It's an easy step to read the power of the natural world as the power of something supernatural, acts of an almighty, even a vengeful God. The result is what you might call the apocalyptic sublime, as in this work by John Martin, in which the storm heralds the coming of the Last Judgment. Back here at the National, we've left Vernet's shipwrecks and storms behind, and we've moved forward 50 years or a few rooms to Turner's depiction of Ulysses behind me. Now, I said at the start that I wanted to talk about how the concept of the sublime had developed, and by looking at this work, we can see some of those changes through the 19th and 20th century and what it can do for us today. Now, when you look at this image, you can see some of the same classic features of the sublime we saw in the Verney. There's the soaring mountain peaks at the top of the scene, for example. But on the other hand, obviously a great deal has changed. The water is now calm and smooth. And in fact, there are two strands of this work that I want to highlight in particular. The first is the light. So what is ungraspable here is not the sort of threatening force of nature, but a kind of radiance. And it doesn't tower above us, but elevates us with it. The natural world here is no longer an overpowering threat, so much as the closest modern experience of something like the holy. The second aspect is, of course, the theme of the work itself. This is a depiction of Ulysses' escape from Polyphemus. As the German thinker Theodor Adorno would emphasize in the 20th century, this is a narrative about the use of cunning, the use of reason to manipulate and control and manage natural dangers. It's also a narrative about the risks of hubris that comes with such management. So you can see in this single image, we have two models of our relationship to nature. One in which the natural world, as exemplified by the light, is ungraspable because it's almost spiritual. The other in which Ulysses, through use of reason, rational planning, tricks, is able to manage and manipulate natural threats to keep safe from them. His ship, unlike those we saw in the Verneys, sails serenely on. If we now jump forward a little, we can see that in the 20th century, of these two models, nature as spiritual and nature as potential object of rational control, it's the latter that is most important, I think, for contemporary art. One strand, exemplified well by something like Gursky's Shanghai image, captures the idea that we are now dwarfed by our own technological achievements. It's what you might call the urban sublime. It's not the mountains that tower above us, but the buildings that we ourselves have created. The other, powerfully illustrated by Bertinsky, is what you might call the Anthropocene sublime. It shows the extent of the changes to the natural world that our attempts to manipulate it have wrought, and at the same time, as with Ulysses' hubris, the terrible dangers stored up for all of us in those manipulations of nature.
We've gone from Verney's wooden ships right into the heart of modernity. And perhaps it's ultimately that which makes the sublime so compelling. Its capacity to shift, to adapt, to give us a new sublime from the post-colonial to the technological. Every time what we fear and what we wonder at changes too.